Today's focus is going to be the impact of global trade. Okay, so the three goals. You're going to learn what was the Columbian Exchange, what was mercantilism, and what is capitalism. Those are the three goals for today's lesson. So a reminder, the Columbian Exchange, which you wrote this, you should have written this definition down on Tuesday's lesson, but if you did not, you can pause and write this down now. But the Columbian Exchange is the exchange of flora, fauna, and pathogens between previously unconnected parts of the world. Okay, and recall from Tuesday's lesson when you learned about Columbus, this exchange began when Columbus landed in the New World. Okay, so this started going on when Columbus landed in the New World. Okay, so for the Columbian Exchange, it's really just a movement. It's a movement of people, it's a movement of ideas, and it's a movement of goods back and forth, okay, between the Old World and the New World. So we're going to go kind of into some of the things that were exchanged. And as we go through some of the things that went from the New World to the Old World, or the Old World to the New World, I want you to think in the back of your head, was the Columbian Exchange an overall good impact on the world, or were the negative impacts of it too much and it really had an overall bad impact on the world? So as you're learning about the things that were transferred back and forth between the Old World and New World, keep that question in mind. Okay, so the Old World is considered Europe, Africa, Asia, that area of the world, the area that we've been learning about all year. And the New World is considered South America and North America. So, and there was an exchange of goods. So first we're going to focus on the things from the New World going over to the Old World. So we're just going to hit on a few of the items that came over. So for example, corn came from the New World to the Old World. We also had potato that came from the New World, and the potato had a big impact on the Old World, particularly in Ireland. So these goods, like the potato, they were very easy to grow. So areas of the world over in the New World would grow it. And since it was so easy to grow, they had a surplus of food, which meant that it's going to make their population grow, because more food could mean that they could have more people and the survival rates would be higher. So Ireland actually came to rely on the potato so much that when they had the famine of 1845, which prevented the potato from growing, Ireland could not handle the loss of that potato. And that's when they had a huge migration they migrated out of Ireland because they didn't have enough food, because they didn't have enough potato because of the famine. But before that, it's not like they always had the potato, but they became to rely on the potato so much that they could not sustain their population without the growth of the potato. So they would migrate. There was a big migration during that time period when they could not grow the potato anymore. And when the sweet potato also, when the first sweet potato was planted in China, that really took off also, and that boosted the population. Because remember, those things are really easy to grow. Another item that came over from the New World to the Old World was the tomato. And the funny thing about the tomato is when it first came over, particularly in Germany, they did not trust the tomato. They didn't really think it was healthy or you could eat it. So there were a lot of warnings about the tomato and about not eating it. But eventually, obviously, they would learn that there was nothing wrong with eating the tomato. But if you think about it, just think of Italy and the impact that the tomato had on Italy. Because when you think of Italian food, you think of probably a lot of pasta sauce. And pasta sauce is made from tomato. So it pretty much reshaped a lot of the things that they cooked, that tomato. And another thing that came over from the New World was the turkey. Okay, they did not have the turkey before that. So these are just a few of the items, few of the goods that came from the New World to the Old World. Okay, next up we're going to go over some of the things that went from the Old World to the New World. Okay, so a lot of livestock came over. Horses, cows, sheep, and pig. The New World did not have those animals before the Columbian Exchange. So if you think about the horse and the Native Americans, a lot of times those two things go hand in hand. A horse, the Native Americans, but the Native Americans did not have the horse before the Columbian Exchange. Okay, another thing that came over from the old world to the new world was wheat. And if you've ever driven out west and you had to go through Nebraska or any of those long, boring states, that's all you see is wheat. So just think of how, when that came over to the new world, how it must have changed the landscape of North America, that wheat. Okay, another thing that came over from the old world to the new world were a lot of diseases. Okay, now remember, recall during the Black Plague, when we talked about that, it never reached the North America and South America because it wasn't discovered yet, and also all the water. So that never reached it, so the Native Americans weren't impacted. Now, there were a lot of like the measles and the mumps and a lot of those diseases that the Europeans built immunities for from always being around it. When they came over from the old world to the new world, the Native Americans, they've never experienced those viruses and diseases. So a lot of the Native Americans would end up dying from these new viruses that they did not have immunities built for. So that was an impact of the Columbian exchange. Okay, and you could think of it in today's terms with this Columbian exchange. Right now, we have a new virus that people, the COVID-19, that people do not have immunities built for, that came from Asia, from China, to over to us. And just think now, travel is even more widespread. So these diseases and viruses can travel even more quicker along these exchanges. Okay, and another thing that came over that started because of the Columbian exchange was slavery and the slave trade. So that was something else that began during this time period, this exchange of people and slavery and the slave trade. Okay, so you can pause after don't pause now, but after I give the directions, or you can continue watching this entire video and go back to this part. But in your notebook, you're going to answer one of the following questions. Okay, and you're going to end up, after you write it down in your notebook, you are going to take it to Google Classroom and you're going to type what you wrote in your notebook in Google Classroom. Okay, you're either going to, using this map here, you are going to choose another item that we did not talk about. So it could be any item that we did not talk about. You could talk about the honeybee, the pepper. You can talk about tobacco, and you are going to pick an item that we did not talk about, and then you're going to write down how that item reshaped the area it went to. Was it positive or negative? So that's one choice. Or you're going to argue whether you think the Columbian exchange had an overall positive impact or negative impact on the world. So again, you can pause this video now and answer the question, and then hit play when you're done, or you can come back to this spot when you're all done with this lesson. Okay, and this is going to go into your Google Classroom. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about mercantilism. Okay, so another pencil there, so you're going to make sure you should have that down, the definition. So you should write down this definition. Mercantilism is an economic policy that promotes strengthening a nation by expanding its trade. The goal is to bring wealth into a country, which equals power. So anything that you can do with trade to make sure that you are getting a lot of money, make sure that you are a wealthy country, that's going to make it that you have a lot of power. So one thing that places did back then, and that pretty much still do, is they taxed any imports coming into a country. So any good that is being brought into the country is going to be taxed. So this kind of promotes people not buying things out of your colony or country because they're going to have to pay a tax on it. So that's one way that they helped strengthen their nation. They also created colonies. Okay, so think of the 13 colonies. So these colonies, any of the goods that they sold within the colonies, some of that money would go to the mother country. So the mother country is like, you know, in charge of all the colonies. So they would create these colonies, and let's say a colony had a lot of trees, so that equals a lot of lumber. which equals a lot of sales in lumber, the mother country would get a lot of that money from there. So colonies was a way to strengthen the power that you had. And also just to know that from all of this, they grew. The more money you had, the more powerful you were. So these were just some things that they started in economic policy that they started to put in place after the Columbian Exchange. And then last up is capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which businesses are privately owned and operated for profit. It is like a free enterprise system or a free market. So you want to make sure you write that definition down in your notebook. So some key features of capitalism, well, private ownership. So people can take the risk to buy businesses and farms. Business owners decide what to make. Investors can invest money. Supply and demand. So supply is how much of a product businesses will make. Supply can be affected by scarcity of resources. Demand is how much somebody wants it, and it can be affected by how popular that product is. And they get to set their own prices too, so for the goods, but you want to make sure that you set a good that is a set a price for a good that people are going to pay for. So that is capitalism, and these two things pretty much developed right after the Columbian Exchange. Okay, so to wrap it up, you should know now what the Columbian Exchange was. You should be a little bit familiar about mercantilism and also be able to tell what capitalism is.